Mindfulness for Resilience with Mary-Jo Fetterly, funded by the Craig H. Nielsen Foundation and brought to you by SCI&U for Healthy Living.
So welcome as you all join in. It's really great to see you and to know you're there. I'm gonna
miss you for a couple of weeks.
I love this, and we've been talking about trying to figure out how to extend it in past September. So
yeah, good.
We'll try and do that. So
I hope so.
So I'm going to jibber jabber just a little bit here, and I'm curious actually too, because we're moving in a little bit of a more I wouldn't say complex, but I will say, actually I will use that word, because our emotions are quite complex, as you may have already gathered. I mean, you can have in 1 minute a flood of different emotions. You can go from feeling overwhelmed to starting to feel anxious, to then tightening up and feeling resistant, and then the cacophony of of emotions are right there, and within 2 minutes you've gone through this whole barometer really of different feelings and emotions. And so now with mindfulness, we've built a base and a foundation, and we know that breath is our main anchor. And then we also know that our attitude in mindfulness is one of acceptance. It's one of curiosity. It's one of compassion, in the sense of a grandparent might have for a toddler, or talking to your best friend. So with that attitude, as you move into mindfulness, you're creating if you will, an environment for growth and for resilience to begin to develop. And some of you also may notice that it's not easy. And if we were just focusing on breath and counting the breath and kind of staying at the basic level of attending to the emotional body, or being aware of all the sounds around us, that's great. I mean, that's great. If your mindfulness practice is really consistent and that's what you're doing, that's awesome. And eventually, over time, what may happen, and what will happen for a lot of people even before they get to that place, is they will stop doing mindfulness, or they will get bored, or they'll get feeling like this doesn't work, or they'll get uncomfortable. Because as you move a little bit more awareness into consciousness, and as you develop your awareness to take in more, what you'll start to notice is those feelings that you shove down, or those emotions that are hard to deal with, will come up to the surface. And that's normal, and that's actually good. But you might not think it's good, because you don't want to feel anxious or fear or doubt. But bear with it, because the more you are able to acknowledge and name those feelings, which probably go way back to when you had to stuff them down, and they've become unconscious. But those feelings and those emotions, they can tend to rule your life, and actually taint, to a certain degree, your relationships, your conversations, and even your relationship to yourself and your body. And we could look at pain in that instance, or anxiety. And when we get into that fight, flight, or freeze loop, because we've habituated those feelings that are underneath the anxiety, we tend to think that it's all about just the anxiety or the pain. But there was probably something, an emotion, that was actually the precursor to that feeling state. And so, and there's usually a story that goes along with an emotion. And this is all normal, and this is all part of what we store in that part of our brain called the primitive brain, which houses the amygdala and the hippocampus. And so those associations they seem really real to us now, because we've lived with them for so long. And they are real to a certain degree. So it's not to discount your feelings or your emotions. And we want to try and develop our mindfulness so that we can start to first of all, see those feelings and emotions for what they are. And without getting into any psychological stuff about it, simply acknowledging them will start to shift the hold they have in that primitive brain. And so what will happen is that fight, flight, or fear mechanism, which is really part of those emotions, will start to lose its grip, lose its hold. And that's a good thing. And initially it may feel like, oh, I don't know if I want to feel this. But if you go back to your anchor of the breath, and this is the same for pain, for any difficult emotion or feeling, and you just allow the breath then to absorb that feeling state, and you stay with it, and you watch where your mind might get distracted to. And so the key here, so there's two keys, is to first of all, recognize the emotion or the feeling state, then to name the emotion, ideally, and or the feeling, and then to figure out where you feel that in your sensory body. So that's the trajectory. And the next thing is to know and to recognize when you are in your reactive fight, flight, or freeze state. So even in noticing, uncomfort or discomfort or kind of overwhelm, it might trigger anxiety. And that you need to recognize as part of the fight, flight, or freeze primitive brain. And so as you recognize that and you just hold space for it, you allow that primitive brain to relax. And the primitive brain is like that little toddler. It just doesn't stop the tantrum. It's not going to stop because you say stop. You need to hold it. You need to give it, a sense of embodiment. And you need to be with it and just stay with it, so that as you cultivate this awareness and this place of compassion and kindness around it, you shift that part of your brain. And it's been researched and all that kind of stuff. And of course, we could probably have a whole session on those studies, but we don't need to get into the head about it. You can just trust that will happen. And we're going to feel that happen as we move through our practice today. I'm going to mention the fight, flight, or freeze emotions because I think it's kind of interesting. So fight is the emotions of anger, the emotions of judgment, the emotions of aggression, being critical, being skeptical. So you might notice when you want to escape, take flight, you might notice those emotions coming in and, oh, why is she doing this mindfulness thing again? Why is she saying that? Judgment or whatever. And so just notice it. Allow yourself to notice, first of all, you're actually in a conditioning part of your brain, which is this sort of overreactive response into the fight, flight, or freeze primitive brain. And just be careful and gentle with that and allow yourself to just, take that grandparently approach to whatever that emotion is and stay in touch with your body as you kind of titrate between the emotion and the breath, and allowing the curiosity and the loving kindness with that half smile to really to caretake that for a moment or two and allow it to dissipate. So that's kind of the fight state. The next state that some of you may recognize is the flight state. And so we had fight, which is anger, aggression, criticalness, judgment. The flight state is usually when you get into a defensiveness about an emotion or a feeling. And that state is also accompanied by this desire to avoid that state and or that person, place, or thing. And you also, in the flight state, can be a little bit obsessive. So a workaholic, for instance, is really avoiding maybe their emotions by staying really busy. And so that would be a typical flight kind of a response, overreaction from the amygdala brain. And then the next state is the freeze state. And this is less common for most of us. It's usually associated with trauma. And trauma could be emotional trauma. Certainly, a parent that's very degrading, that's emotional trauma. But as you get older, the freeze state kind of shifts to those first two because it's easier to maintain our waking consciousness when we're in those two and not in the freeze. As you could imagine, freeze is freeze. It means you become immobile. You are totally disassociated with your body. And that might be moving more towards depression and those other types of things that then would have to be treated professionally. So that's a lot to take in, I understand. And I can really appreciate that as we move into this time in our lives, that a lot of us may be feeling anxious. And I think there's a cultural anxiety. As I said to Sonia earlier, I feel like, we're on this big ship, and, we're in this really rough sea. And the rough sea is not getting easier. In fact, it's getting a little bit more difficult to navigate. And just like in a rough sea, we don't want this amygdala brain being in fight, flight, or fear. We want to make wise choices and wise decisions for ourselves, especially when things out there are not that reliable. So the more unreliable and more uncertain the world is externally, the more reliable and certain you want your internal world to be. So there we are. And with that, I would invite you to take your dignified and your gracious seat and allow yourself to come into a place of open attention and comfort. And we'll just get ourselves really cozy in our chair where we feel that good support. And just while your eyes are still open, allow yourself to go to your gauge, your dial that we talked about 4 weeks ago, and just see where your dial is right now. So from 1 to 10, with 1 being very, very, very calm, and 10 being a little bit out there in the anxious area, in that fight, fight, or freeze reactive response. Just gauge yourself and notice where you are without any judgment and without needing to do anything at all, just noticing. Good. And then let's allow ourselves to do a little bit of our shoulder shrugs, bringing the shoulders up towards your ears with just a slight bow to your head. Take the upper arm bones back and let the arm bones draw downward. Feeling that whole nice deepening of your shoulders into the spine, down the back, even towards your sitting bones. And then again, up we go, hiking them up towards the ears, taking the upper arm bones back, not pinching them inward, but then drawing them down. Oh, that feels so good. And then inhale, let's just lean over onto our left arm or elbow and take the left ear to the left shoulder. Breathe in. You can slowly bring your right arm up and just extend it away from the shoulder, neck, ear plane, and keeping your left ear right over your left shoulder. Try not to bring your head forward so you really get a good stretch in there. Inhale big. And exhale. And inhale big. And stretch out your right arm just a bit more. If you want to cock the wrist, you'll increase that stretch. And release. And come back to neutral. Do a little shoulder shrug up, upper arm bones back, and elbows release downward. Good. And then take the right ear to the right shoulder, and here I'm so tight. And just allow that tightness to be breathed into. Perhaps taking your left arm away from the body. Or if you can't stretch that arm out, you can keep it bent at the elbow and get the same effect. If you need to rest that arm, whatever works for you. Nice big breath in again. And exhale, release down. Good. And so now closing your eyes and allowing yourself to move into your internal universe, this place that David Bohm, the late physicist, said, the space between the cells is greater than the space between the planets in our galaxy. And it's the depth of a world that we hardly know. So as you're in your space that you occupy, behind your eyes. I invite you to take your 3 breaths and to allow yourself to take 3 full breaths, very consciously allowing yourself to tune in as you breathe to that gentle smile of compassion. Tune in to all of the senses as you breathe. And then also tune into your state right now. So if you can name your emotional state right now, what would you name it? And if you could feel where that emotional state is in your body, where would you feel it? And where do you feel it? So allowing yourself just to be with that in your kind, gentle smile of attention. And then you're going to notice the next state that you might notice. And you also are going to attend to your breathing and allowing yourself to come back to that anchor of your breath if your mind gets distracted. And so often boredom, judgment, planning into the future, or looking into the past are ways that we distract ourselves. So allow yourself to stay with your needle on your dial, continually harvesting from your sensory and your feeling body and from your emotions, your next state. So this may move quite fluidly from one emotion to another, or it may not. It may stay on one emotion. And so what I'm going to invite you to do is to continue to notice the different waves of your emotional body and what you feel, if you notice it, and then you can name it. And then ideally you could feel where that lives in your body, in your sensory body. You may notice as you're noticing in your inner landscape that your emotions change and they continually flow like a river. And actually, I like to think of them as a river, particularly some of the more difficult ones. So in this next few moments, imagine yourself like the banks of a river, where you're the 2 banks, the solid foundation of that river. And then just watch your river of emotions flowing, or your feelings. And so the banks don't change. That stays this beautiful, calm, stable presence. And what moves through you is your river of emotions. And so observe that for the next few moments. Be the banks of this great river. And allow that fluid movement of emotions to move. And if you find that you're stuck, if emotion gets you stuck and into a story, just look at it like a dam. And then go back into your banks, go back into your breath. And allow yourself to breathe into that. You could also say, by naming the emotion, and you could ask, am I willing to be with it right now, if it needs your attention? Otherwise, you go back to visualizing that riverbank, the 2 riverbanks, and the river moving through. And don't forget, pain is a feeling. So if you feel pain anywhere in your body, maybe get curious into what emotion is behind that pain. What is it? And you don't need to answer it. The curiosity will allow your primitive brain to either provide you with that or to allow you to be with that without any reaction. Good. And then we're going to move back for a moment just to the breath. And I'm going to invite you to cleanse your inner palate, your inner mental and emotional and sensory palate, and just come back to breathing. And breathing very consciously. If it helps for you to count with the breath, you could go up to 5. If it helps you focus on your breath, you could also add the words calm on the inhale or ease to the exhale. Or if it helps just to focus on the feeling, the sensory movement of the breath, you could just focus on that. And keeping your awareness attuned, notice what takes you out of your concentration on the breath. What feeling or emotion is it? And let's now do what's called titrating between being very conscious of your breath and also very conscious at the same time of that first thing that distracted you, maybe the emotion of self-doubt. Who knows? Let yourself move between being aware of your breath and holding space for that self-doubt. So now we've got 2 things going on. We're aware of our breathing, and we're also holding space and awareness for that difficult emotion or feeling. Maybe it's the pain. And now we're breathing into that in our next phase. So we've become aware of it. Now let the breath breathe in to that self-doubt, to that fear, to that anxiety, and or to that pain. And just do that for a few moments. If a different emotion or feeling comes up, still staying focused on your breath, your anchor, allow that solid anchor, like the banks of the river, to hold space for what is and to recognize it, to name it. Good work. So keeping with this particular procedure, I'm going to add one more thing into this. And we're going to bring the breath into the emotions the same way we just did. And we're going to also stay focused on the breath. But I'm going to invite you to notice some good feelings and some good sensations in your body and a good emotion that is there in you, because there are some, I know for sure. So in deep inside of you, can you feel contentment? Can you feel your joy? Can you feel your awe, your curiosity? Can you name that emotion? And can you name where you feel it? In your heart, maybe on your face. Maybe you're excited about a new project or school. And as you use the breath as your anchor, now naming some of these positive states that you also habituate to, and that are part of you. Allow yourself to end on the state of joy or love, loving kindness, and breathe that into your heart. And use these 5 breaths now that you're going to take to concentrate your breath, your awareness on expanding into your heart, into that state of compassion, kindness, and love. You may feel as you breathe that gentle smile on the corners of your lips and on the inside of your cheeks as you breathe into compassion, joy, and love. Allowing these last few minutes to just be a rest in stillness. So allowing all of the work that you've done in your practice now to come to rest, and the river's calm and the banks are very, very, very solid. And the river's joining back up with the ocean, and it's spreading into this big ocean of your being, of life, where it's supported and where all that it needs is there. You can watch from this place in the bottom of the ocean all of the outside world, all of the ongoing things that go on, and also all of the things that go on in our emotions, thoughts, and feelings. You can go back to this place anytime. And as you come back slowly and with the same amount of dignity and graciousness that you entered your practice, I'd like to thank you for being here and doing the work. It's really great. And I think the more and more of us that do mindfulness, the better off we'll all be in the craziness of this uncertain world that we're in. And somebody asked me or someone said to me the other day, I feel like I'm waiting for this to be over. And I thought about that for a minute, and I recognize that as the fight, flight, or fear response, and probably a lot of us actually have had that thought, I can just hardly wait for 2020 to be over. Thanks, Linda. And yet the waiting is the practice. Where we are right now is our practice. And where we are right now, whatever that might be on the external world, the fact that you're able to develop these places of bringing your awareness and consciousness into this place where you're not affected by as much, ideally, by the external and events and environment, is a place that is the biggest choice we have right now. It's the biggest thing we can do, and I think that all of you are courageous and brave and smart for doing so. So, thanks. All your comments are really well received and with a lot of gratitude. Thanks. And I hope we continue it too. We're working on how that can happen. So don't worry. It's gonna happen some way or other. And we have the YouTube channel, which has these recordings and they'll always be there. I don't think that channel is going to close. But it is really nice to do it together, and it's great to have it. Oh, thanks, Carmen. It's great to have it with a group of us doing it, because even though we aren't in the same room, I feel you. And I think the power of doing something together is just, mathematical. I think it just, and I'm not a math person, so don't ask me for what that is, but I just feel that it exponentially helps us and the world. So
I so agree. Yes, that
yeah,
I'm totally on that.
I think so too. So it's great to be together here. And if there's no questions or no further comments, I will leave you with that practice. And if you have questions, you can always send them to me or through the SCI&U study YouTube channel, or even through our website. And I'd be happy to answer them. And be well, be safe, and stay really aware with kindness and attention. And we'll meet again next week.